While rummaging through the garbage behind Romano's Italian restaurant, a tear rolled down the corner of her eyes. She remembered how bright she was in economics college, how she got high grades on all projects and exams. As she stored sealed food packages that her friend had secretly hidden there to help her, Rachel couldn't help but wonder how life could have played this trick on her. But there's one of life's great mysteries. Overnight, your life can change completely, and Rachel's life was about to change again. But this time, maybe fate wanted to make amends with her. "Rachel," a voice said behind her. Rachel froze. She knew that voice. How could she not recognize it? Was she hallucinating? Her instinct was to pretend she hadn't heard and simply walk away. "Rachel Donovan?" the man asked again. Rachel's heart seemed to have a life of its own, and before she could flee like she usually did when things got difficult, she turned to find someone she hadn't seen in many years. "Christopher," she whispered, holding pasta containers against her chest. "So it's true," the man said with tears in his eyes. "I needed to see it with my own eyes." There was compassion in his voice. I have to go," she said, preparing to leave hurriedly. Her face burned with shame. Have you ever had that feeling? You had to face someone you loved, but were completely disheveled and felt embarrassed to be seen that way? What Rachel felt was a little worse than that, because she wasn't just disheveled. She was more than that. She was dehumanized. She looked nothing like that Rachel who walked impeccably, radiant, with her long, well-groomed hair. Now she wore old and worn clothes. Her hair was a tangle that she only tied up in a messy bun and couldn't even remember the last time she had combed her hair. Before you judge poor Rachel badly, I need to tell you that in recent months, she was more concerned with surviving than taking care of her own appearance. No, wait. Please, Rachel, don't you dare run from me again. Christopher's voice was firm, but not cruel. They told me they saw you a few weeks ago going through this dumpster. I couldn't believe it. I had to come here to see if it was really you, he said, pausing while Rachel looked at the ground embarrassedly. She couldn't look back at him. What happened to you, Rachel? What are you doing here? There was a certain indignation in Christopher's voice. How had the brilliant woman he had loved since his adolescence ended up in this situation? I ask myself that question every day, Rachel said with a shy smile, without the courage to look Christopher in the eyes. What happened, Rachel? Christopher asked, with his voice low and approaching Rachel. When he got close to her, almost cornering her against the wall, he said, almost whispering, "Please, don't lie to me." "Christopher, I have nothing to say to you," Rachel said, lowering her head. Things got difficult suddenly. Growing up was realizing that the world is unfair and cruel. It's not so difficult to end up here when you come from where I came from, she said with wet eyes full of hurt. Rachel, you just disappeared. No message, no note, no voicemail, nothing. There was sadness and resentment in his voice. Christopher, my Christopher, Rachel said finally, looking into his eyes. That was 9 years ago. You were a young medical resident. Things got complicated for me. I just didn't want to get in the way of your life, your promising future. She took his hand and ran her right thumb over his wedding ring. And I see it worked out, she said with a sad smile. There's nothing I wouldn't have done for you, Rachel. You know that, he said, lifting her head, diverting her gaze from the ring to his eyes. I know, Christopher. And that's exactly why I chose to leave. She smiled shyly. But there's no reason to worry about me. This is just a phase. I'm fine. It started to rain, but it didn't seem to matter. You're lying. I'm looking at you. You're not fine, Christopher said, getting serious. You know, Christopher, my father used to say that when we really like a place and for some reason we need to leave, we should never return to that place. Because when we go back, we might find it different from what we remembered and be disappointed with what we find. Sometimes the best thing to do is leave that place and the moments we lived there, stored in our memory. I don't want you to remember me like this, I want you to remember me as I was 9 years ago, Rachel said as a tear ran down her face. You're not a place. You were my favorite person in the world, Christopher said, controlling his voice so that the repressed desire to cry that he had been holding for many years wouldn't become evident. Let me fix this, Rachel. Let me take care of you. It was almost a prayer. Christopher, I'm broken. I don't think you can fix this, she said, drying her tears. But I'm going to try, he said with a firm voice. Christopher, she whispered, don't try to stop me. You don't have that right. I looked for you for years. Please, Rachel, let me take you home at least. Rachel was ready to protest. But then it hit her. She had a secret she could no longer hide from Christopher. He had the right to know, and another person also had the right to know about Christopher's existence. During the 20-minute drive through increasingly run-down neighborhoods, Christopher kept glancing at her. She sat rigid, staring out the window, the food containers clutched in her lap like precious cargo. You can turn here, she said quietly, directing him to a street lined with small, deteriorating houses. Thank you, she said as she got out. For the ride. Rachel. But she was already walking toward a house with peeling paint and a sagging porch, not looking back. Christopher sat on the terrace of his penthouse apartment at 3 a.m., staring at an empty glass of whiskey while his mind wandered through the past. Rachel's face haunted him, both how she looked tonight and how she used to be. 9 years ago, she was the brightest economics student at the university. Not just beautiful, but brilliant. She had so many plans to help small businesses in developing countries. That would be her career project, she used to say. They spent countless nights in the library, him studying anatomy while she pored over economic theories. You're going to save the world, he used to tell her. And you're going to save lives, she'd reply, kissing him softly. They were inseparable. They talked about their future together, his residency, her master's program, maybe a small wedding after they both graduated. Then one day in their senior year, everything changed. Rachel had been sick for weeks, morning nausea, exhaustion, frequent trips to the bathroom. She kept saying it was stress from her thesis. Maybe you should see a doctor, Christopher had suggested one morning after she'd rushed to the bathroom again. I'm fine, just tired, she would say. That was the last real conversation they'd had. 3 days later, she was gone. Phone disconnected, apartment empty, university enrollment canceled. She'd vanished like she'd never existed. Christopher's mother, Grace, had been surprisingly unsympathetic. Perhaps she realized you two were too different, darling. You're from different worlds. Sometimes people come to their senses. Christopher had searched everywhere. He contacted her few relatives and even drove to her hometown in Ohio. Nothing. Rachel Donovan had disappeared completely. Then he came to the most painful conclusion. Rachel didn't want to be found. Over the years, he'd tried to move on. He dated other women, successful ones from his social circle, but none filled the void he felt for Rachel. 1 year ago, he'd gotten engaged to Anne Richardson, a beautiful and successful model. Anne was gorgeous, sophisticated, everything his mother wanted for him. But even now, with 3 months until the wedding, something felt missing. My love, what are you doing awake at this hour? Anne said, yawning and sitting on Christopher's lap. He had been living with his fiancée for a few months, but Christopher had already made his decision. Nothing would come between him and the love of his life again. Thinking, Anne, thinking a lot, he said, taking whiskey and courage. What is my handsome fiancé thinking about so much? She said in a sweet voice. Anne, we need to talk, he said, his voice becoming serious. Anne looked at him attentively. I know we've experienced incredible things these last 3 years. You're exactly everything my mother always wanted for me. He paused to take another shot of whiskey, attempting to gather courage to say difficult words. But I'm confused, Anne. I'm not sure this is what I want for myself right now. Anne gave an incredulous laugh, disbelieving. What? What are you saying, Christopher? She said, putting her hand on his forehead. Do you have a fever? Are you delirious? There are 3 months until our wedding. This isn't the time to joke about something like this. I know, Anne. I'm not joking. I know I'm being a bastard to you, and forgive me for that. But I can't pretend, Anne. I can't pretend that all of this was never more than theater, he said, looking Anne in the eyes. Christopher, how can you be so cold? Anne screamed while crying indignantly. Everything was fine between us. We were making plans, choosing our honeymoon, and now you simply look me in the eyes and call it theater. Anne's sadness had turned into anger. Christopher looked at her without saying anything, thinking about what a selfish bastard he was. Or was he just tired of having his destiny commanded by other people his whole life? Christopher never chose anything for himself. College, friends, the places he frequented, everything was always orchestrated by his mother, who said he needed to honor the family name. The only thing he had chosen for himself had been Rachel, and that was stolen from him. You have every right to hate me, Anne. I understand, Christopher said coldly, accepting the insults. No, Christopher, Anne said desperately. I don't hate you. I couldn't. I hate what you're doing to us, she said, putting her hand on his face. But it's okay. I understand. It must be stress from your work, the wedding. I know it's just a phase and this will pass. I'll give you time to think. I'll let you be alone as long as you need. I know you'll change your mind. She seemed to be saying this more to herself than to him. Anne, I already canceled the wedding a few days ago. I'm sorry, he said, owning his decision. What? Anne looked at him incredulously. There was disappointment in her look. But Anne wasn't the type to humiliate herself. So she simply went to the bedroom to get dressed, took all her belongings, the clothes she had left at Christopher's house, and simply left. By dawn, it was as if she had never been in that house. The next morning, Christopher called in sick for the first time in 2 years. He drove back to the rundown neighborhood, his heart pounding as he knocked on Rachel's door. She opened it wearing the same clothes as yesterday, looking surprised and embarrassed. Christopher, you shouldn't have come here. I couldn't stop thinking about you. I need to understand what happened. Why you left. Why you... Mommy. Who is it? Christopher's words died in his throat as a boy appeared behind Rachel. 9 years old, with messy blonde hair and unmistakable green eyes. Christopher's own eyes staring back at him. Time stopped. Christopher felt the world becoming blurred around him. Everything went silent. David, go play in the backyard, honey, Rachel said quickly, her voice tight with panic. But Mom, the boy protested. Now, David, please, Rachel said with her gentle but firm voice. The boy obeyed reluctantly, but not before giving Christopher another curious look. Christopher felt like he'd been hit by a truck. The pieces were falling into place with devastating clarity. Rachel's morning sickness 9 years ago, her sudden disappearance. His mother's suspicious lack of surprise when Rachel vanished. Rachel, he said, watching the boy disappear to the back of the house. Then he turned to Rachel, confused, surprised, shocked. Christopher, I can explain. Start by explaining why you have a son who looks exactly like me, he said, still shocked, yearning to hear what he already imagined. Rachel tried to articulate an answer, but when she opened her mouth, the words wouldn't come out. She put her hands over her face and started crying uncontrollably. Instinctively, Christopher hugged her with tears in his eyes. He knew. He didn't need an answer. He simply knew. The answer was in the boy's eyes that were exactly like his. Rachel. Why Rachel? Damn it, Rachel. Why did you choose to go through this alone? He said, unable to contain his tears. Rachel could barely speak. There was crying repressed for years. Years she spent keeping this secret. Years she spent trying to support her son and herself without asking anyone for help. I had no choice, Christopher. Forgive me for that. I had no choice. It's okay. It's okay, he said, calming her. Deep down, he already knew what had happened. The two had a unique connection that not even time could erase. Just from her crying, he understood everything exactly, but he needed to hear it from her. He led her inside, closing the door on the world that had been so cruel to her. The house was small, sparsely furnished, but impeccably clean. Children's drawings were taped to the refrigerator, bright spots of color in a world that felt overwhelmingly gray. He sat her down on a worn-out sofa, the springs groaning in protest, and knelt before her. He took her hands in his. They were cold and trembling. "Rachel," he began, his voice a low, gentle plea, forcing her to meet his gaze. His own green eyes, the same eyes he had just seen in her son's face, were swimming with a storm of emotions, pain, confusion, and a dawning, heartbreaking understanding. "Look at me. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. Not for one more second." He took a deep, steadying breath, the question tearing from him with a decade of repressed anguish. "Rachel, is he my son? Just tell me the truth. Please." The question, though he already knew the answer, hung in the air between them, heavy and absolute. It was the key that would unlock the past, and they both knew it. Rachel's breath hitched, and a fresh wave of tears streamed down her face. She nodded, a small, jerky movement, a silent confession that shattered the world he thought he knew. "Yes," she whispered, the word so quiet he almost didn't hear it. "His name is David. And he's yours." Christopher closed his eyes, a pained sound escaping his lips. He had imagined this moment in 1,000 different ways over the years, angry confrontations, tearful reunions, but nothing could have prepared him for the sheer, gut-wrenching reality of it. A son. He had a son. A 9-year-old boy who had been living a life of hardship just a few miles away, completely unknown to him. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Why didn't you tell me, Rachel? Why did you run?" She pulled her hands away, wrapping her arms around herself as if to hold her broken pieces together. "I was going to," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength as she began to unburden her soul. "I found out I was pregnant a week after you last saw me. I was terrified, but I was happy too. I was going to tell you that weekend. I had it all planned out." She stared at a faded spot on the carpet, her mind traveling back in time. "But before I could... Your mother came to see me." Christopher went rigid. "My mother?" "Yes," Rachel confirmed, a bitter, humorless laugh escaping her. "Grace. She found me at my apartment. She was so polished, so calm. She told me she knew about the baby. I don't know how. Maybe she had me followed. She said a child would be a disaster for you, that you were on the cusp of a brilliant career, that you had your residency lined up at the best hospital in the country. She said a baby, especially with someone like me, a girl with no family, no connections, would ruin everything you had worked for. It would be an anchor, she said, that would drag you down." The shame and humiliation of that day were still fresh, still raw. "She offered me money," Rachel whispered, the words tasting like poison. "A check with so many zeros I couldn't even count them. She told me to take it, to disappear, and to take care of the problem. She said it was the best thing for everyone, for you." Christopher felt a white-hot rage so intense it made him dizzy. He could picture his mother perfectly, her cool, condescending smile, her clinical, cutting words. "Did you take it?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Rachel's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with a spark of the proud, fiery woman he remembered. "No," she said fiercely. "Of course not." I tore the check in half in front of her. "I told her your child was not a problem to be taken care of. But she was right about one thing." Her voice softened again, filled with a deep, aching sadness. "She was right about you, Christopher. About your future. I had seen how hard you worked. I knew you were destined for greatness, and I loved you too much to be the reason you failed. I couldn't be the girl who trapped the brilliant Dr. Montgomery with an unplanned baby. I couldn't bear the thought of you looking at me, at our child, with resentment one day. That would never have happened, he insisted, his heart breaking for her, for them, for the life they had lost. You don't know that, she countered softly. We were kids. The pressure from your family would have been immense. So I made a choice. I chose to protect your future. I packed my bags, I unenrolled from school, and I disappeared. I thought it was the most selfless, loving thing I could do. She finally looked at him, her eyes pleading for him to understand. For years, it was so hard, Christopher. I moved here, where no one knew me. I worked 3 jobs, waitressing, cleaning offices, stocking shelves at night, just to keep a roof over our heads. David was my whole world. He was the reason I kept going. But it was a lonely, exhausting life. Her gaze drifted toward the window. Things got a little easier when Mrs. Gable, my elderly neighbor, started watching David for me while I worked. She was like a grandmother to him. But she passed away a few months ago. I lost my child care, which meant I lost my best-paying job. It all just spiraled. The bills piled up. The eviction notice came. I was desperate. The food from the restaurant. It was just to get us through until I could figure something else out. She finally finished. Her story laid bare in the quiet room. She was trembling, exhausted from the weight of her confession. Christopher looked at the woman before him, a woman who had sacrificed her future, her dreams, her entire life, all out of a misguided, heartbreaking love for him. She had endured a decade of hardship to protect him, while he had been living a life of luxury, believing she had simply abandoned him. The injustice of it all was a physical blow. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. He wiped away a tear with his thumb, his own eyes shining with unshed tears of rage and regret. No more struggling, Rachel, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Your fight is over. I'm here now. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to take care of David. I promise. The promise hung in the air, a shield against the crushing weight of the past 9 years. For the first time since she had fled her old life, Rachel felt a flicker of hope. It was terrifying. Hope was a luxury she hadn't been able to afford, a dangerous emotion that could lead to disappointment. But looking at Christopher's face, at the fierce determination in his green eyes, she found herself, against her better judgment, starting to believe. Christopher, you don't have to, she began, but he cut her off, his voice gentle but firm. Yes, Rachel. I do, he said. This isn't a negotiation. This isn't charity. This is me stepping up to a responsibility I should have had all along. You are not staying here another night. His decisiveness was a force of nature. Within the hour, he had arranged everything. He didn't ask her to pack. He simply stated that he would buy them everything they needed. He walked to the back of the house, knelt to David's eye level, and introduced himself not as a stranger, but with a simple, earth-shattering truth. Hi, David, he said, his voice softer than Rachel had ever heard it. My name is Christopher. I'm your dad. David, who had been shy and withdrawn, stared at him, his small face a canvas of confusion and dawning wonder. He looked from Christopher's face to his mother's, who gave him a tearful, reassuring nod. A slow, brilliant smile spread across the boy's face. My dad, he whispered, as if testing the reality of the word. That's right, buddy, Christopher said, his own voice thick with emotion. And I've been waiting a very long time to meet you. The move itself was surreal. They left the small, cramped house with nothing but the clothes on their backs and drove towards a life that felt like it belonged in a different universe. Christopher's mansion was a modern architectural marvel, a sprawling estate of glass and white stone nestled in the city's most exclusive tree-lined hills. It was less a house and more a private sanctuary, beautiful, imposing, and utterly intimidating. As they stepped into the grand foyer with its soaring ceilings and polished marble floors, Rachel felt a familiar wave of inadequacy. This was his world, a world of wealth and power she had only ever seen from the outside. But then she felt a small hand slip into hers. She looked down to see David staring up at the massive crystal chandelier, his mouth agape in pure, unadulterated awe. "Wow," he breathed. "Is this a castle?" Christopher chuckled, a real, warm sound that echoed in the vast space. "It's our home now, David," he said, and the word "our" struck Rachel with a profound weight. The first few days were a blur of adjustment. Christopher gave them the entire east wing of the mansion. Rachel's suite was larger than her entire old house, with a private balcony overlooking immaculate gardens. David's room was a child's paradise, quickly filled with every toy, book, and gadget a 9-year-old could dream of. Christopher, it turned out, was a natural at spoiling his son. For Christopher, every moment was a revelation, a mixture of profound joy and deep, gnawing regret. He was discovering the simple, sacred rituals of fatherhood that he had missed for nearly a decade. He taught David how to throw a baseball in the sprawling backyard, his heart aching with the ghost of a 5-year-old he never got to teach. He sat with David at the massive kitchen island, patiently helping him with his math homework, a lump forming in his throat as he realized he had missed 9 years of school projects and parent-teacher conferences. One evening, Rachel found him sitting on the edge of David's bed long after the boy had fallen asleep, just watching him breathe. "He has your smile," Christopher whispered, not looking at her. "When he's sleeping, he looks just like you did in the university library when you'd fall asleep on your textbooks." "He has your eyes," Rachel replied softly from the doorway, "and your stubbornness." A comfortable silence settled between them. The anger and resentment were gone, replaced by a shared, quiet grief for the years that had been stolen from them. "I'm so sorry, Rachel," he said, finally turning to look at her, his face etched with a pain that mirrored her own. "Every time I look at him, every time he calls me Dad, I'm so incredibly happy. But then I think about you. I think about you changing his diapers alone, staying up with him when he was sick, working 3 jobs just to feed him. I was here, in this palace, while you were fighting for survival. I can't forgive myself for that." "It wasn't your fault," she said, walking into the room. "You didn't know." "But I should have," he insisted, his voice raw. "I was a medical student. I saw the signs. The nausea, the fatigue. I should have pushed harder. I should have known something was wrong. And my mother, I let her convince me that you just left. It was easier than facing the truth that I had lost the only person I ever truly loved." The confession hung in the air, as vulnerable and real as the sleeping child in the bed beside them. The lines of their arrangement were blurring. This was no longer just about providing for his son. It was about rebuilding a connection that had never truly died. Later that week, Christopher walked into the kitchen to find Rachel and David covered in flour, laughing as they tried to make pancakes from scratch. David's face was smeared with chocolate, and Rachel had a dusting of flour on her nose, just like she had all those years ago in his college apartment. The scene was so perfectly, achingly domestic, it stopped him in his tracks. This was it. This was the life he had been denied. A home filled not with the sterile silence of his own making, but with the warm, chaotic, beautiful sound of a family. His family. He leaned against the doorframe, a slow smile spreading across his face. He was a father. He was home. And as he watched the woman he had never stopped loving laugh with the son he had just found, he knew he would burn his entire world to the ground before he ever let them go again. The fragile peace of their new life was a bubble, and Christopher knew it was only a matter of time before the outside world tried to burst it. The first and most formidable challenge came in the form of his mother. Grace Montgomery requested his presence for Sunday brunch, a command disguised as an invitation. He knew this confrontation was inevitable. He arrived at his parents' stately manor, the house he grew up in, feeling more like a stranger than a son. Grace greeted him in the grand foyer, her smile as perfectly manicured as the prize-winning roses in her garden. She was the epitome of old money elegance, a woman who wielded social standing like a weapon and believed that the Montgomery name was a sacred trust to be protected at all costs. "Christopher, darling," she said, kissing the air beside his cheek. "We have so much to discuss. Your father and I have been beside ourselves with worry." They sat in the formal dining room, the table set for a banquet, though it was just the two of them. For a while, Grace engaged in pleasantries, asking about the hospital, about his research. But Christopher refused to play the game. "I know what you did, Mother," he said, his voice low and devoid of warmth, cutting through her polite chatter. Grace's smile didn't falter, but her eyes, the same shade of green as his own, turned to chips of ice. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Christopher leaned forward, his hands clasped on the polished mahogany table. 9 years ago, a girl named Rachel Donovan. You paid her a visit, didn't you? You offered her money to disappear. The directness of the accusation finally cracked her perfect composure. She placed her fork down with a delicate clink. "I did what was necessary," she said, her tone shifting from maternal to imperious. "That girl was a distraction, a liability. She would have ruined you. I was protecting your future, Christopher. Our family's legacy." "My future?" he shot back, a bitter, incredulous laugh escaping him. "You weren't protecting my future. You were curating it. You were eliminating anything, anyone, that didn't fit into the perfect life you had designed for me. You stole a decade of my life. You stole my son." At the word son, Grace flinched, the first genuine crack in her armor. "So, it's true then. The rumors are true. You found her, and she has a child." "She has my child," Christopher corrected, his voice like steel. "A 9-year-old boy named David. My son, your grandson. A grandson you have been denied because of your selfish, manipulative games." Grace rallied, her expression hardening once more. "And you're sure he's yours? A woman like that, appearing after all these years. It's all very convenient, isn't it? Now that you're a success. Have you even considered that she might be lying, Christopher? That this is all an elaborate scheme to trap you?" The insinuation was so vile, so typical of his mother's cynical worldview, that it solidified his resolve. "I've seen him, Mother. He has your eyes. There is no doubt. And for the record, she didn't come to me. I found her. I found her rummaging for scraps behind a restaurant because she was too proud and too scared to ask for help, even after everything she had been through." He stood up, the legs of his chair scraping against the floor. "This brings me to the other reason I'm here. The wedding is off." "What?" Grace was genuinely shocked now. "Christopher, don't be ridiculous. You can't call off the wedding to Anne. The invitations have been sent. The arrangements have been made. Think of the scandal. Think of what people will say." "For the first time in my life, I don't care what people will say," he said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority. "I care about my son. I care about the woman you tried to destroy. Anne is a good person. She doesn't deserve to be married to a man who is in love with someone else." "In love?" Grace scoffed, standing to face him. "Don't be a fool. That's not love. It's a misplaced sense of guilt. You cannot throw away a perfect match like Anne Richardson for a nobody from your past. I forbid it." Christopher looked at his mother, at the woman who had orchestrated so much of his life, and he felt a profound sense of pity. She would never understand. Her world was built on alliances, appearances, and legacies, not on love. "Your permission is not required," he said, his voice final. "Rachel and David are my family now. They are living with me. They will be a part of my life from this day forward. You can either accept that and be a grandmother to your grandson, or you can refuse. But if you choose the latter, you will not only lose a grandson, you will lose your son as well." He turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving his mother standing alone amidst the pristine, untouched brunch. He had drawn his line in the sand. The battle for his future and for his past had just begun. Moving into Christopher's world was one thing, living in it was another entirely. For David, the transition was a seamless, joyful adventure. He swam in the infinity pool, discovered the wonders of the in-home movie theater, and quickly learned that his new father was incapable of saying no to a request for ice cream or a new video game. He was a happy, thriving boy, basking in the sunshine of a life he had only ever dreamed of. For Rachel, however, it was a daily struggle against a current of subtle hostility and unspoken judgment. Christopher, in his earnest attempt to integrate her into his life, insisted she attend social functions with him. The first was a cocktail party at the home of the hospital's chief of staff. Dressed in an elegant but simple navy dress that Christopher's personal shopper had picked out, Rachel felt like an imposter. The women were all impossibly thin, dripping with diamonds, and spoke in a coded language of summering in the Hamptons and wintering in Aspen. They looked through her, their eyes scanning her from head to toe, their polite smiles never quite reaching their eyes. "So, you're the one," a woman with a face pulled unnaturally tight by surgery said to her, her voice dripping with condescension. "Christopher's old friend. How wonderful for you that he's so charitable." The comment was a perfectly aimed dart, designed to remind her of her place. Rachel murmured a non-committal reply, her cheeks burning, and quickly excused herself. She spent the rest of the evening hovering at the edge of the crowd, a satellite in an orbit she could never hope to join. Christopher, for his part, was a constant protective presence. He kept a hand on her back, introduced her proudly as Rachel, and steered her away from the more venomous members of his social circle. But he was blind to the 1,000 tiny cuts she endured when his back was turned. The dismissive glances, the whispered comments just loud enough for her to hear, the way conversations would stop abruptly when she approached. The differences in their worlds created unexpected tensions between them. One evening, Christopher came home to find her in the massive state-of-the-art kitchen, trying to figure out the ridiculously complex espresso machine. "Just ask the staff to make you a coffee, Rachel," he said, loosening his tie. "That's what they're here for." "I'm capable of making my own coffee, Christopher," she replied, her frustration with the machine bleeding into her tone. "I've been doing it my whole life." "I know, but you don't have to anymore," he said, missing the point entirely. "You should be relaxing, focusing on David. Let other people handle the small things." "These small things have been my entire life," she snapped, turning to face him. "You don't understand. This world of yours. It's beautiful, and I'm so grateful for what you've done for David, but I feel like I'm losing myself here. I don't know how to be a person who just has things done for her. I feel useless." Christopher looked taken aback. "You're not useless. You're raising our son." "That's the most important job in the world." "But it's not all I am," she insisted, her voice trembling with a frustration she couldn't quite articulate. "At least when I was working 3 jobs, I was me. I was a provider. I was a survivor. Here, I'm just David's mother, or worse, your charity case." The argument was their first. It was quiet, painful, and ended with no resolution. He couldn't understand her desperate need for independence, and she couldn't explain the suffocating feeling of being a kept woman, even one who was loved. The chasm between their pasts was a constant, silent guest in their new life. He would suggest a trip to Paris for the weekend, forgetting that for her, a trip to the grocery store without carefully calculating the cost was still a novelty. She would meticulously clean up the kitchen after dinner, a habit born of years of self-reliance, much to the confusion of the household staff. She was a woman forged in the fires of adversity, proud and fiercely independent. He was a man born to a world where problems were solved with a phone call. He had saved her from drowning, but now she was struggling to learn how to breathe in this new, rarefied air. And as she fought to find her footing, she was unaware that the sharks were circling, drawn by the scent of vulnerability in the water. Anne Richardson stared at her reflection in the mirror of her pristine white apartment. The face, staring back, was that of a woman who had been publicly humiliated. The wedding had been cancelled, the society columns had buzzed with gossip for weeks, and she, a top model accustomed to being the center of admiration, had been cast aside for a nobody. The pitying looks from her friends were worse than any outright insult. But Anne was not a woman to accept defeat. Her relationship with Christopher had been more than just affection. It was a strategic merger. It was the culmination of a life plan, a secure future, the pinnacle of the social ladder. She was not about to let it all crumble because of some ghost from his past. Her phone rang. It was Grace Montgomery. "Anne, my dear." Grace's voice was smooth as silk, but with an undercurrent of steel. "I believe you and I have a mutual interest that needs to be discussed. Shall we have lunch?" They met at a discreet, Michelin-starred restaurant. Over plates of food that neither of them touched, they formed an unholy alliance. Grace, furious at Christopher's defiance and terrified of her family's name being tarnished by a connection to Rachel, saw Anne as the only way to restore order. Anne, desperate to reclaim her position and her future, saw Grace as a powerful, necessary ally. "He's blinded by guilt," Grace said, her lips a thin, hard line. "He's built this fantasy in his head where she's a tragic heroine and he's her white knight. It's pathetic. He won't listen to reason." "So we need to give him a reason," Anne replied, her mind already working, the same sharp, strategic mind that had navigated the cutthroat world of high fashion. "We can't attack her directly. That will only make him more protective. We need to make him doubt her." The plan they hatched was as cruel as it was brilliant. They wouldn't just create a lie. They would rewrite history. Their target was not Christopher's love for Rachel, but his trust. Anne began her campaign subtly. She accidentally ran into Christopher at a coffee shop near the hospital. She was the picture of grace and forgiveness. "Christopher," she said, her voice soft and full of practiced sincerity, "I'm not here to cause a scene. I just want you to be happy. Truly." He looked wary, but relieved. "Anne, I'm so sorry for the way things ended." "Don't be," she said, placing a hand on his arm. "I understand. You have a son to think of. It's just, be careful." She let the words hang in the air. "Careful of what?" She sighed, as if reluctant to speak. "I just worry about you. It's all so convenient for her, isn't it? She disappears for 9 years, and then just happens to resurface when you're one of the most successful surgeons in the country. A woman in her situation. People do desperate things for money, Christopher. I just don't want to see you get hurt again." She had planted the first seed of doubt. It was a small, poisonous seed, but in the fertile ground of his past betrayal by his first fiancée, she knew it could grow. A few days later, she struck again. She called him, her voice filled with fake concern. "Christopher, I'm so sorry to bother you, but a friend of mine from a charity board just mentioned something odd. She said a woman matching Rachel's description was asking about your net worth at a fundraising event nearly a year ago. She was trying to find out how to get in touch with you. I'm sure it's nothing, but it just seemed strange. It was a complete fabrication, of course, but it was plausible. It preyed on his deepest fear, that he was being used, that Rachel's reappearance wasn't fate, but a calculated plan. Meanwhile, Grace was working from the inside. She began to warm up to Rachel, inviting her for tea, feigning an interest in her life and in David. "I was wrong about you, my dear," Grace said one afternoon, her eyes full of false sincerity. "I see now how much you've struggled. It must have been so difficult, turning down that money I offered you all those years ago. It took a lot of pride." The statement was a trap. Rachel, wanting to believe in a possible reconciliation, simply nodded. "It was a hard time," she admitted quietly. Grace now had what she needed, a tacit admission, in her presence, that money had been discussed. The pieces of their malicious puzzle were falling into place. They weren't just building a case against Rachel, they were constructing an entirely new reality. One where Rachel was not a victim of circumstance, but a masterful and manipulative gold digger. And Christopher, caught between his heart and his head, was the ultimate target of their deception. With the seeds of doubt planted, Grace and Anne moved to the final, most devastating phase of their plan, creating the proof. Grace, with the vast resources of the Montgomery family at her disposal, was a master of manipulating reality. Her first move was to contact a distant, disgruntled cousin who ran a small and not entirely reputable financial services firm. For a substantial fee, he was more than willing to do her a favor. He created a series of documents, a fabricated wire transfer confirmation from a holding company Grace controlled, dated 9 years ago, showing a payment of $250,000 to a newly opened bank account. The account number was real. It belonged to a dormant account Grace had maintained for years. The name on the account, however, was forged: Rachel Donovan. Next, Grace located a former waitress who had worked with Rachel briefly during her first desperate year in the city. The woman had been fired for theft, a fact Grace's private investigator quickly uncovered. Grace paid her a visit, offering her a sum of money that would change her life. In exchange, she was to sign a sworn affidavit. The affidavit was a work of fiction. In it, the waitress recalled conversations where Rachel had boasted about being pregnant with a rich medical student's baby. She claimed Rachel had talked openly about a payday and had shown her a bank statement with a large deposit, saying her problems were over. The story was detailed, plausible, and utterly damning. The final piece was Anne's contribution. She used her connections in the high-end social world to find a man, a struggling actor with a gambling problem, who vaguely resembled one of Christopher's old university friends. Anne paid off his debts and coached him on his role. He was to be the friend who had seen Rachel a year ago, not at a charity event, but at a bar where she had been asking about Christopher's wealth and marital status. With their arsenal of lies assembled, the fake bank transfer, the perjured testimony, and the paid actor, Grace made her move. She requested a private meeting with Christopher, her face a mask of grave concern. Anne was also present, playing the part of a supportive, worried friend. "Christopher, darling," Grace began, her voice trembling with feigned reluctance. "There's something you need to see. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't stand by and watch you be deceived." She laid the documents on his desk. First, the bank statement. "I had my financial team look into it," she lied smoothly. "It seems Rachel wasn't entirely truthful about refusing my help. This transfer was made to an account in her name a week after she left you." Christopher stared at the paper, his face draining of color. The account number, the date, the amount. It looked undeniably real. This can't be right," he stammered. "I'm afraid it is," Grace said softly. She then produced the waitress's affidavit. "I found a woman who worked with her back then. She was willing to speak about Rachel's intentions." He read the sworn statement, each word a hammer blow to his heart. The story of Rachel boasting about a payday, of her calculated plan, painted a picture of a woman he didn't recognize, but one that fit perfectly with the narrative of a gold digger. "And Christopher," Anne chimed in, her voice full of gentle pity, "there's more. Remember I told you a friend had seen her asking about you. He was afraid to come forward, but he agreed to speak with you. He's waiting outside." The actor was brought in. He played his part perfectly, reluctantly, recounting how he had seen Rachel, how she had seemed obsessed with Christopher's financial status, asking if he was married, how much he was worth. It was a perfect, three-pronged attack, a meticulously constructed web of lies designed to prey on his deepest insecurities. The bank statement was the physical proof. The affidavit was the character assassination. The actor was the confirmation of recent intent. Christopher sat at his desk, the evidence spread before him, his world crumbling. Every piece of information seemed to corroborate the others. It was a logical, coherent, and utterly devastating narrative. His mind, trained in science and evidence, struggled to find a flaw in the logic. He thought of Rachel, of her story of hardship, of her fierce denial of taking any money. Had it all been a lie? A performance? Was she the most gifted actress he had ever met? The seed of doubt Anne had planted had now grown into a monstrous, thorny vine, wrapping itself around his heart and squeezing until he could barely breathe. He loved the woman who had been living in his house, the mother of his child. But the evidence in front of him suggested that woman didn't exist. She was just an illusion, a carefully crafted role played by a stranger, and he had fallen for it. Again. Christopher sat in his study for hours after his mother and Anne had left, the documents spread across his desk like pieces of a shattered life. The silence of the grand house was deafening. He stared at the fabricated bank statement, the perjured affidavit, the memory of the actor's convincing performance replaying in his mind. It was a mountain of evidence, each piece supporting the other, creating a narrative so logical, so complete, that it felt impossible to refute. His scientific mind, trained to follow evidence to a conclusion, was at war with his heart. His heart knew Rachel. It knew her pride, her strength, the fierce love in her eyes when she looked at their son. But the evidence screamed betrayal. It painted a picture of a master manipulator, a woman who had played the long game, waiting for the perfect moment to cash in on the son he never knew he had. Had her poverty been real, or just a stage for her final act? When Rachel came looking for him later that evening, she found him there, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his face a grim, unreadable mask. The warmth that had been growing between them was gone, replaced by an Arctic chill that made her shiver. "Christopher?" she asked softly. "Is everything all right? You missed dinner." He didn't look at her. He just pushed the papers across the desk toward her. "Explain this," he said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. Rachel picked up the top sheet, the bank statement. She saw her name, the staggering amount, the date from 9 years ago. Confusion clouded her face. "What is this? I've never seen this before. This isn't mine." "Isn't it?" he countered, his voice laced with a bitter sarcasm. "Because I also have a sworn statement from a former colleague of yours who remembers you bragging about your payday, and a witness who saw you asking about my net worth less than a year ago. It all paints a very clear picture, wouldn't you say?" The blood drained from Rachel's face as she began to understand. This was a setup, a sophisticated, cruel attack. "Christopher, this is a lie," she said, her voice trembling as she looked from the papers to his cold, hard face. "Someone is trying to frame me. You have to know this isn't true." "Do I?" he shot back, finally looking at her. The pain and betrayal in his eyes were a physical blow. "All I know is that you lied to me for 9 years, Rachel. You kept my son from me. How am I supposed to know what's real and what's another one of your secrets?" "This is different," she pleaded, moving closer to his desk. "This is a lie designed to tear us apart. Your mother, it has to be her. She's trying to get rid of me." "So now you're blaming my mother?" He scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Of course, the classic move. Blame the wealthy mother-in-law. It's almost too perfect, Rachel. Too predictable." Tears streamed down her face now, hot and desperate. This couldn't be happening. After everything they had been through, after he had promised to take care of her, was he really going to let them be destroyed by a lie? "Christopher, please," she begged, her voice breaking. "Look at me. You know me. You know my heart. You have to believe me." He stood up, turning away from her to stare out the window at the city lights, his back a rigid wall of rejection. The evidence was too strong. The wound from his first fiancée's betrayal was too deep. The fear of being made a fool of again was too powerful. "I wanted to believe you," he said, his voice heavy with a sorrow so profound it seemed to suck the air from the room. "God, I wanted to believe you more than anything. I looked at you and David and I thought, I thought my life was finally whole." He turned back to face her, and his expression was one of utter, heartbreaking defeat. "But I can't live with this doubt. I can't look at you every day and wonder if it was all a performance, if your love, if any of it, was real." "It is real," she sobbed. "Christopher, I love you." "Stop," he commanded, the words sharp as a blade. "Don't say that. Not now." He walked to the desk, his movements stiff, and gathered the papers. "If this is the kind of woman you are," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "then you don't deserve a place in my son's life, or in mine." He looked at her one last time, his green eyes, the same eyes as their son, now completely empty. "You broke my heart once when you left, Rachel," he said, his voice cracking with the finality of his decision. "But this is so much worse. You've broken it for the second and last time." The days that followed were a living nightmare. The warmth and hope that had begun to fill the mansion evaporated, replaced by a suffocating, glacial silence. Christopher was a ghost, moving through the house with a cold, detached grief. He spoke to Rachel only when necessary, his words clipped and formal, discussing logistics concerning David as if they were business associates negotiating a merger. The love and vulnerability he had shown were gone, locked away behind an impenetrable wall of pain and mistrust. Anne Richardson moved back into the penthouse. She played the part of the comforting, understanding fiancé to perfection, her presence a constant, triumphant reminder to Rachel of her defeat. "He's just trying to protect his heart and his son," Anne said to Rachel one afternoon, her voice dripping with false sympathy while Christopher was at the hospital. "After a betrayal like this, he needs stability, someone he can trust." The final, most brutal blow came a week later. Christopher summoned Rachel to his study, the same room where he had declared her heart broken. His lawyer, Mr. Davies, was with him. "Rachel," Christopher began, his voice devoid of emotion, "in light of recent events, I've been advised that it is in David's best interest to have a more stable and consistent living environment. I will be seeking full legal and physical custody of our son." The words hit Rachel with the force of a physical assault. She couldn't breathe. "What? No, Christopher, you can't. You can't take my son away from me." "It's not about taking him from you," he said, though his eyes wouldn't meet hers. "It's about providing him with the best possible life. The resources, the education, the stability that I can offer, and you, at this time, cannot. He's trying to protect David from your influence." Anne's voice cut in. She had appeared in the doorway, a silent predator. "And this way, you won't have to worry about finances. Christopher will be providing for you, so you won't have to resort to desperate measures. Again." The veiled threat was clear. If she fought him, they would use the evidence to destroy her in court. Defeated and utterly broken, Rachel left the gilded cage, her son torn from her arms. Life in the penthouse became a hollow performance. Christopher bought David every toy imaginable, but the boy's laughter no longer echoed in the halls. Anne tried to fill the maternal void, suggesting outings and buying him gifts, but David met her efforts with a cold, resentful silence. "Want to go get ice cream, sweetie?" Anne asked one afternoon, her voice sickeningly sweet. David didn't look up from his tablet. "My mom takes me for ice cream," he said flatly. "Well, I can take you too. We can be a family," she chirped. David finally looked at her, his green eyes, Christopher's eyes, flashing with a fury that belied his age. "You're not my mom!" he shouted, the words echoing in the cavernous living room. He ran to his room, slamming the door. The rebellion escalated. David refused to eat meals with Anne, pushed away her attempts at affection, and spoke only in monosyllables. The bright, happy boy Rachel had raised was replaced by a sullen, angry child lost in his grief. Then he stopped eating almost entirely. He grew listless, pale. A low-grade fever started, one that no doctor could find a physical cause for. He was, quite literally, sick with a broken heart. One night, Christopher was trying to coax David to eat some soup when the boy pushed the bowl away, tears streaming down his face. "I want my mommy," he sobbed, his small body trembling. "Please, Daddy. I just want my mommy." The sound of his son's desperate plea finally shattered Christopher's wall of pride and anger. He saw, with blinding clarity, the collateral damage of his decision. He picked up the phone. When Rachel arrived, her heart clenched at the sight of David. He was pale and thin, the light gone from his eyes. He clung to her the moment he saw her, burying his face in her side. "Mommy, don't leave again," he whispered. "Never, baby. I'm right here," she promised, her own tears falling. She spent the next 2 days by his side, coaxing him to eat, reading to him, holding him while he slept. The fever broke. The color returned to his cheeks. Her presence was the only medicine he had needed. On the third night, after David was finally, peacefully asleep, she found Christopher in his study. "He's better," she said, her voice cold and devoid of warmth. "I'll be leaving in the morning." "You can't," Christopher said, turning to face her. "He needs you, Rachel. I need you to stay." Something inside Rachel finally snapped. All the pain, the injustice, the silent suffering of the past weeks erupted in a torrent of furious words. "You need me?" she scoffed, a harsh, incredulous laugh escaping her. "No, you don't need me. You need a nanny for the son you stole from me. You need someone to clean up the mess you made because you were too blind and arrogant to trust the woman you claimed to love." "Rachel, that's not fair." "Fair?" she interrupted, advancing on him, her eyes blazing. "You want to talk about fair? Let's talk about the 9 years I spent working myself to the bone, choosing between paying the rent and buying medicine, all to protect you and our son. Let's talk about your mother, who tried to pay me to get rid of my baby. I did everything I could for David, with nothing. Thanks to the situation your mother put me in." She was right in his face now, jabbing a finger at his chest. "So stop blaming me for the time you lost with your son, Christopher. Stop acting like you're the only victim here. If anyone has to ask for forgiveness, it's you and your mother. I am sick and tired of your accusations. You have no idea what my life has been like. You sit here in your glass tower, a spoiled, selfish, rich man who makes everything about his own wounded pride, and you dare to judge me." She finally paused, breathless, her chest heaving. She had said it. She had washed her soul with the truth. "I love our son," she finished, her voice dropping to a raw, trembling whisper. "And I will not let you poison him with your bitterness or turn him into a pawn in your games. He needs his mother. If you're too blind to see that, then you're not the man I thought you were. You're not even half the man our son deserves." She turned and walked out, leaving Christopher standing alone in the silent study, her words echoing around him like a final, devastating judgment. Christopher drove like a man possessed, the city lights blurring into streaks of desperation. He found her in the dim, stale light of the motel room, a place that seemed to physically represent all the hardship he had forced her back into. She was folding one of David's small t-shirts, her movements methodical and devoid of emotion, a woman on autopilot. "Rachel," he breathed from the doorway. She looked up, and her eyes held no surprise, only a deep, weary exhaustion. "If you're here to discuss visitation schedules, Christopher, my answer is no. I'm not signing anything until I have a lawyer. You will not keep my son from me." "I'm not here for that," he said, taking a hesitant step into the room. The air was thick with her pain. "I'm here because I know everything," he told her. He recounted Teresa's confession, the details of his mother's cruel machinations, the calculated lies from Anne. He didn't spare himself, laying bare his own blindness, his pride, his pathetic fear of being hurt again, which led him to inflict a far greater hurt on her. When he finished, he stood before her, stripped of all his power and arrogance. Just a man broken by the weight of his own catastrophic failure. "I was a fool, Rachel," he whispered, his voice cracking. "A blind, arrogant fool. I let them build a prison of lies, and I locked you in it. I am so sorry." Rachel listened, her expression unreadable. The validation of knowing she wasn't crazy, that she had been framed, was a hollow victory. The damage was already done. "Sorry?" she finally said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You think sorry covers it? You stood in your $1,000,000 office and called me a liar. You looked at me as if I was dirt on your shoe. You used my son, as a weapon to punish me. And you did it because it was easier to believe the worst of me than to trust your own heart." "I know," he said, his own tears falling freely now. "I know, and it was unforgivable. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Rachel. I know that. But I am begging for it anyway. I am begging you for a chance to spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it." "Why should I?" she challenged, her voice rising with the pain of weeks of silent suffering. "So I can move back into your cold mansion and wait for the next time your mother decides to ruin my life? So I can wait for you to have another moment of doubt? I can't live like that, Christopher. I survived for 9 years on my own. I will not spend the rest of my life walking on eggshells, waiting for you to decide if I'm worthy of your trust. That will never happen again," he pleaded, taking another step closer. It has broken me, Rachel. It broke the part of me that was built on pride and fear. I see everything clearly now. I see you. I see the incredible, strong, loving woman who sacrificed everything for me. And I threw it all back in your face. There will be no more doubt. There will only be you." He stopped just before her, his eyes pleading. "I love you. I know my words are cheap right now, but it's the only truth I have left. I have loved you since we were kids in the university library, and I was too stupid and too scared to admit that I never stopped." Her resolve began to tremble. She saw the raw, unfiltered agony in his face, and it mirrored her own. "What about Anne?" she whispered, a test. "Anne is gone," he said without hesitation. "She was a symptom of my cowardice, not a choice of my heart. There is no one else. There never has been." "And your mother?" His face hardened. "My mother made her choice 9 years ago, and again last week. She will have to live with the consequences of that. My only priority now is you and David, our family." He reached out, not to touch her, but holding his hand open in the space between them. A silent offering. "I'm not asking you to come back to the penthouse. I'm not asking you to forgive me today, or even tomorrow. I'm just asking you not to go. Let me prove it to you. Let me show you every single day that I can be the man you and our son deserve. Let me earn my way back into your world." She looked at his outstretched hand, then at his tear-streaked face. The anger was still there, a deep bruise on her heart. But beneath it, the stubborn, resilient love she had for him stirred. He wasn't demanding or commanding. He was begging. He had torn down his own fortress and was standing in the ruins, offering her the pieces. Slowly, hesitantly, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, a warm, desperate grip. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was a beginning. A difficult, painful, but real beginning. The weeks that followed were not easy. They were filled with long, hard conversations, with tears, and with the slow, painstaking work of rebuilding trust. He didn't rush her. He gave her space, but he was a constant, steady presence. He showed up. He listened. He learned. His final actions were quiet, but absolute. A trust was established in Rachel's name, giving her complete financial independence. The ownership of a small, charming brownstone in a family-friendly neighborhood was transferred to her. It was a home, not a cage. He confronted his mother one last time, not with rage, but with a sorrowful finality, explaining that the door to his life would remain closed until she sought forgiveness from the woman she had wronged. One sunny afternoon, months later, Christopher found Rachel in the small garden behind her new home. David was chasing a butterfly nearby. She was planting roses, her hands covered in rich, dark soil. He knelt beside her, not as a billionaire or a doctor, but as a man planting roots. She looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, her smile was free of shadows. He reached out, his hand covering hers in the dirt. It was a new beginning, a chance to grow something beautiful and strong from the ashes of their past. "I love you," he said, his voice full of a quiet, unwavering certainty. "I know," she replied, squeezing his hand. "Prove it." And he knew, with every fiber of his being, that he would spend the rest of his life doing just that. 2 years later, Rachel stood under the shade of an ancient oak tree, the same one that graced the garden of the home she had made for herself and David. There was no grand cathedral, no crowd of society reporters. There were only their closest friends, a handful of colleagues who had become like family, and a healthy, beaming Mrs. Caldwell watching her daughter. David, now a confident 11-year-old, stood beside Christopher as his best man, looking smart in a miniature version of his father's suit. He held the rings with a solemn importance that made Rachel's heart swell. Christopher turned to face her, and the man who stood before her was not the cold, arrogant doctor she had once hated, nor the broken man who had begged for her forgiveness in a dingy motel room. This was a man remade. The ice in his eyes had long since melted, replaced by a steady, unwavering warmth that was reserved only for her and their son. He took her hands, his touch familiar and grounding. "Rachel," he began, his voice clear and strong, resonating in the quiet garden. 2 years ago, I stood before you as a broken man, and I promised to spend the rest of my life earning your forgiveness. I know that a lifetime isn't long enough to erase the pain I caused, but I make this vow to you today, in front of the people we love. I will never stop trying. I will never again let my pride be louder than my love for you. I will never again doubt the truth I see in your eyes." He squeezed her hands. "You taught me that a home isn't made of glass and steel, but of trust, forgiveness, and laughter. You are my home, Rachel. You and David, and I promise to be the safe harbor you have always deserved. I love you. More than my own life." When it was her turn, Rachel looked at the man before her, her partner, the father of her child. She thought of their journey, the pain, the anger, the difficult conversations, and the slow, beautiful dawn of healing. "Christopher," she said, her voice filled with a love that was deeper and more resilient than she had ever imagined possible. "I once told you that you couldn't fix what was broken inside me. I was wrong. You didn't fix me because I was never broken. I was wounded. And you didn't just heal my wounds, you showed me your own. You let me see the man behind the armor, and you trusted me with his heart." She smiled, tears of joy glistening in her eyes. "My vow to you is simple. I choose you, today, and every day that follows. I will continue to choose the man who learned to listen, the father who fought for his son, and the partner who proved that love isn't about never falling, but about helping each other get back up. I love you, and I am so proud to be your wife." As they exchanged rings, presented by a beaming David, the small crowd erupted in applause. Christopher leaned in and kissed her, not with the desperation of their past, but with the gentle, profound certainty of their future. Later, as the sun set and lanterns cast a warm glow over the garden party, Christopher found Rachel watching David chase fireflies with his grandmother. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy Mrs. Montgomery," he whispered in her ear. She leaned back against his chest, a feeling of pure, unadulterated peace settling over her. "More than you'll ever know," she replied. They stood there for a long moment, a quiet, united front. They hadn't gotten a fairy tale ending. They had gotten something far better. A real one. One they had fought for, earned, and built together from the ground up.